What the world was like before the flood. In the first chapters of the Bible, especially the book of Genesis, we are introduced to a world very different from our own, a world before the great flood. This era, often shrouded in layers of interpretations, is marked by long periods of life, divine human interactions, and a closeness to God. Characters like Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and eventually Noah give us glimpses of a life that seems both familiar and distant. The first event that led to the flood occurred before the creation of the world. This event was the creation of the sons of God. In the biblical story of the book of Job, God reveals an event that happened before the creation of the world. Job 38:4-7. Where were you when I founded the earth? Let me know if you have intelligence. Who set its measurements if you know? Or who stretched out the line over it? On what are its foundations founded? Or who laid it his cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the children of God rejoiced. It is revealed that angelic beings, referred to as morning stars and sons of God, witnessed the creation of the earth and celebrated the glory, power, and wisdom of God involved in the process. Before the flood, a fallen being. The Bible makes only passing references to fallen angels because the vast majority of angels in heaven were never lost or turned to evil. However, there were some who made this decision. Keep in mind that heaven was originally intended to be their home for all eternity, but they have now fallen from it. What caused all this? Still, we cannot deny the fact that angels have free will. His fall can be seen in terms of his free will. The book of Jude makes this point quite clear. Jude 5-6, Amplified Bible. But I want to remind you, although you are already aware of all this, that the Lord, after saving a people from the land of Egypt, later destroyed those who did not believe, who refused to trust and obey and depend on him. And the angels who did not keep their dignity, but abandoned their own habitation, he has reserved in eternal darkness, in eternal fetters, for the judgment of the great day. Judas stated that the angels did not keep their due dominion. The phrase due domain can be interpreted as both a rule and a starting point. Angels were made specifically for the purpose of dwelling in heaven with God, worshipping him, and carrying out his commands. They were formed to bring glory to him, just as people were, but humans were designed to dwell on earth, while angels were created to live in heaven. Despite this, these angels left their beginning, which is another way of saying they left their starting point in heaven. The Great Rebellion. Satan, who disguises himself as an angel of light, is in command of these angels and acts as their leader. The Great Rebellion, as some refer to it, was an event in which Satan and a portion of the angelic legions of heaven waged war against God and his angels in an effort to overthrow God's authority in the eternal realm. The devil devised a plan to overthrow God, his creator, and he and the angels who followed him ended up being defeated in the conflict. We get an account of this from Jesus himself, for he was present. Jesus spoke about the glory and majesty he shared with God the Father before the world existed. John 17:5, Amplified Bible. And now, Father, glorify me with you, with the glory that I had with you before the world was. Before the creation of the earth, there was God, and God had majesty with his Son. Jesus declares, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. As can be seen, Satan is much more than a red figure with horns and a trident. He is an ancient being with real spiritual power, which he uses for evil and selfish ends. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, said Paul. We are in a fight, but it is not against flesh and blood. Satan's kingdom is highly organized, with different areas and levels of authority, and its headquarters are in heavenly regions. This is a staggering fact, but it is quite clear. The fact that Satan rules a highly organized kingdom surprises some people, but there are many clear indications of this in the Bible. A spiritual war. A spiritual war began. It is a clash between two kingdoms. One kingdom is ruled by God, the Prince of Peace, while the other is ruled by Satan, the Prince of Darkness. After being cast out of heaven, Satan and his followers compromised with each other and formed the rebel kingdom. In the Garden of Eden, Satan launched his first attack on God's authority on earth. Satan considered the earth his domain and saw Adam and Eve as God's invaders on his territory. If God created humanity to live on earth in order to establish his kingdom, Satan needed a plan of attack. When God created the world, there was a place called Eden. In the Hebrew language, the word Eden means joy or happiness. It was a place of provision where man could meet God. According to Genesis 3:8, "And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden." Now, in the perfect garden, there was a special tree called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God told Adam and Eve that they could eat from any tree in the garden except this one. Satan needed to destroy man's destiny, but how? The devil, the ancient serpent, approached Eve and used three strategic tactics against her: the fall of humanity. The first was the doubt. Is this what God said? Genesis 3:1. You can almost hear the father of lies as he interacts with Eve. The deceiver then used his second strategy, supposition, to make Eve doubt whether the consequences of her disobedience would actually result in her death, as God had declared, "Ye shall not surely die." Genesis 3:4. The third and final approach he used against Eve was temptation. God was disappointed with their disobedience. They could no longer stay in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve had already made a mistake by eating the forbidden fruit. Satan's subversive counterattack completely overwhelmed humans, but God established a beachhead in the Garden of Eden, promising that the serpent's head would be crushed by the seed of the serpent. Cain, someone pointed out, that the sin committed by the first man caused the second man to kill the third. Despite the fact that Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, God continued to bless them. Eve gave birth to two sons, Cain and Abel, with the help of the Lord. As both children grew up hearing stories about God, they were aware that they should make offerings to the Creator. Both boys arrived ready to worship in time, but while the Lord was concerned about Abel and his offering, he was not concerned about Cain and his offering. This enraged Cain. Despite God's warning that he should master sin, Cain deceives his brother, murders him, buries him, and completely dishonors him. "Am I my brother's keeper?" he asks. Fearing that others might kill him for his crime, God placed a sign on Cain to protect him, saying, "If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance sevenfold." Genesis 4:15. Cain was punished by becoming a restless wanderer, far from his home and family. After God punished Cain, he went to live in a place called the land of Nod, which is east of Eden. In this land of Nod, he built a city and named it after his son, Enoch. His descendants included influential people of his day: Jabal, the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock; Jubal, the father of all who play stringed instruments and flute; and Tubal-Cain, who forged tools of bronze and iron. Genesis 4:17-22. What follows Cain's punishment is the story of two families, a recurring theme in Genesis. Unfortunately, Cain's murderous ways were passed down through his family line. We find a man bragging about his own violence when we reach his great-great-grandson. Evil was spreading. God's perfect design is only 4 chapters old, and already we find people delighting in bloodshed and disrespecting his design for marriage. Before the flood, polygamy was also passed down through Cain's offspring. Until that time, a man and a woman were married for life, but Cain's descendants had many wives. In contrast to Cain's lineage, God established a new family tree. God gave Eve a son named Seth in place of Abel. Seth exemplified the same type of worship as his late brother Abel, as people began to call on the name of the Lord in connection with Seth. Cain's manner of worship, which is proud, points to himself. The humble way of worship, as practiced by Abel and Seth, cries out to God. Jude 11. It's no surprise then that when God needed an obedient servant hundreds of years later, he chose Noah from the line of Seth. Cain's legacy was complicated. On the one hand, he and his family were really good at coming up with new ideas and ways of doing things. On the other hand, they also had a lot of problems with fighting and violence, and it seemed to get worse over time. This has become a symbol of what it is to be human, a struggle between our potential for great deeds and our capacity for great evil. After the tragedy of Abel's murder by his brother Cain, God gave Adam and Eve another son named Seth. The birth of Seth was a sign of hope and redemption for humanity. Eve recognized the divine gift when she said, "God has given me another descendant in place of Abel because Cain killed him." Genesis 4:25. The lineage of Seth represented a new opportunity for humanity to follow God's ways and live according to his commandments. Seth, like Abel, had a pious nature and sought to live a life of obedience to God. In contrast to Cain's lineage, which increasingly strayed into violence and sin, Seth's descendants sought to maintain a close relationship with their Creator. The Bible tells us that a son was also born to Seth, and he named him Enosh. At that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. Genesis 4:26. The descendants of Seth are described as those who called on the name of the Lord, indicating a revival of true worship and spirituality among the people. While Cain's lineage was marked by technological and cultural progress, but also by violence and polygamy, Seth's lineage was a beacon of hope and righteousness in a world increasingly corrupted by sin. Among Seth's notable descendants, we find Enoch, a man who walked with God and was found no more, for God had taken him away. Genesis 5:24. Enoch's life is an extraordinary example of faith and intimate communion with God. He lived 365 years, a relatively short period compared to the other antediluvian patriarchs. But his life was marked by such a close relationship with God that he did not experience death like the others. Another significant descendant of Seth was Methuselah, the oldest man mentioned in the Bible, who lived 969 years, Genesis 5:27. Methuselah was Noah's grandfather, and his long life is often interpreted as an expression of God's patience and long-suffering, who delayed judgment to give humanity more time to repent. Noah, a direct descendant of Seth, is a central figure in the biblical narrative. He is described as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Genesis 6:9. At a time when corruption and evil had spread across the earth, Noah stood out for his faithfulness and obedience to God. It was through Noah that God planned to preserve human and animal life during the great flood that was to come. Seth's lineage therefore serves as a sharp contrast to that of Cain. While Cain and his descendants turned away from God and plunged into sin, Seth's descendants sought to live in harmony with the Creator. Through Seth and his descendants, we see God's continued promise to redeem and restore humanity, even in the midst of the world's increasing depravity. This chapter of biblical history reminds us that despite the prevalence of evil, there is always a faithful remnant who seek God and live according to his precepts. Seth's lineage is a testimony to God's grace and hope of redemption, pointing to the coming of the Savior, who, through his obedience and sacrifice, would fully restore humanity to communion with God. Human civilization began to develop significantly after the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden and the subsequent multiplication of their descendants. However, along with population growth and the advancement of society, there was a progressive moral decline that culminated in an era of great corruption and violence. The first chapters of Genesis show us that the descendants of Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, who murdered his brother Abel, were responsible for many cultural and technological advances. Cain built a city and called it Enoch, in honor of his son. Cain's descendants also introduced livestock farming, the making of musical instruments, and working with metals such as copper and iron. Genesis 4:17-22. However, along with these advances, humanity's morality began to degrade. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, was the first to practice polygamy, taking 2 wives. He also bragged about killing a man and boasted about his violence, showing an escalation in depravity and moral callousness. Genesis 4:23-24. Seth's lineage, on the other hand, was initially marked by devotion to God. His son, Enos, began a tradition of calling on the name of the Lord, which suggests a movement of worship and search for God among the descendants of Seth, Genesis 4:26. However, as time passed, even Seth's godly lineage began to be corrupted by the evil influence around him. Genesis 6 describes one of the most mysterious and disturbing aspects of this period. When men began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves women of all kinds. They chose, Genesis 6:1-2. This passage has been interpreted in many ways, but a common interpretation is that the sons of God were fallen angelic beings who united with human women, resulting in a race of giants known as the Nephilim. This unnatural union further aggravated the evil in the land. The Bible reports that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 6:5. God saw the widespread corruption and violence that dominated humanity, and it brought great sadness to his heart. Faced with this situation, God decided to bring judgment on the earth, to eradicate corruption, and start over with Noah, a righteous man who walked with God. Noah was chosen to build an ark that would save him, his family, and a representation of all animal species from the imminent flood that would destroy all life on the earth. Genesis 6:9-22. Humanity's moral decline before the flood serves as a powerful warning about the consequences of rebellion against God and the unbridled pursuit of selfish and immoral desires. The story of Noah and the flood is a reminder of God's holiness and justice, but also of his mercy and grace, as he provided a way of salvation for those who remained faithful to him. While human civilization progressed in terms of material and cultural development, the lack of fidelity to God and the increase in sin led to profound moral decay. The destruction by the flood was a divine response to the total corruption of humanity, but also a point of reset, offering a new opportunity to live according to divine precepts. The narrative of moral decline before the flood challenges us to reflect on the importance of maintaining our integrity and devotion to God, even in the midst of a society that may be increasingly removed from spiritual and ethical values. It is a call to remain firm in faith, seeking justice and righteousness, and remembering that God always offers a path to redemption for those who seek him with all their heart. The story of the Nephilim is one of the most enigmatic and fascinating in the Old Testament. Mentioned briefly in Genesis 6, these beings are described as giants and men of renown who existed on the earth in the days before the Great Flood. The presence of the Nephilim is closely linked to the growing evil and moral decay that led to divine judgment through the flood. The sons of God and the daughters of men, Genesis chapter 6, begins by describing a disturbing event. When men began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives of all they chose. Genesis 6:1-2. The identity of the sons of God has been the subject of several interpretations, but one of the most accepted is that they were fallen angels, spiritual beings who rebelled against God. These fallen angels, attracted by the beauty of human women, descended to earth and bonded with them, resulting in hybrid offspring. This unnatural union is described as a great sin, as it violated the order established by God and corrupted divine creation. Emergence of the Nephilim. From this union between the sons of God and the daughters of men, the Nephilim were born. In those days there were Nephilim in the earth, and also afterward, when the sons of God possessed the daughters of men, and they bore them sons. These they were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Genesis 6:4. The word Nephilim is often translated as giants, but its exact meaning remains unclear. The term may derive from a Hebrew root meaning fall or overthrow, indicating fallen or violent beings. The Nephilim were known for their great stature and strength, being described as brave and men of renown. Their presence on earth contributed to the rise of violence and corruption, exacerbating humanity's moral decline. The divine reaction. The illicit union and proliferation of the Nephilim was seen by God as an abomination. The widespread corruption of the earth and unceasing violence led God to declare, "Then the Lord said, My spirit will not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh, but his days will be 120 years. Genesis 6:3. God, realizing that man's wickedness was great and that all his thoughts were continually evil, decided to bring an end to that age of depravity through the flood. The flood, as judgment God, chose Noah, a just and upright man, to be the instrument of his redemption. He instructed Noah to build an ark that would save his family and a sample of all animal species. The ark would be salvation from imminent destruction. Behold, I will bring waters upon the earth, the flood, to destroy all flesh in which there is the spirit of life from under the heavens. Everything that is on the earth will perish. Genesis 6:17. The flood was an act of divine judgment, eradicating the corruption and pernicious influence of the Nephilim. After the flood, the earth was cleansed and the human lineage restarted through Noah and his family. Legacy and influence of the Nephilim. The brief mention of the Nephilim in Genesis leaves many questions unanswered. However, its impact on the biblical narrative is significant. They represent the culmination of rebellion against God and the corruption of divine creation. Furthermore, the Nephilim reappear in other parts of Scripture, such as in Numbers 13:33, where Israelite spies describe the giant inhabitants of Canaan as descendants of the Nephilim, perpetuating the memory of these antediluvian beings. Reflection. The story of the Nephilim is a grim reminder of the consequences of disobedience to God and the illicit mixing of the divine and the human. It underlines the seriousness with which God treats corruption and violence, as well as his determination to purify and restore his creation. At the same time, the narrative of the Nephilim highlights the need for spiritual vigilance and faithfulness to God amid the temptations and corrupting influences of the world. Conclusion. The chapter on the invasion of the Nephilim leads us to a deeper understanding of the context and causes that led to the Great Flood. It reveals the complexity of the interaction between the heavenly and the earthly and challenges us to maintain our spiritual integrity. Ultimately, the story of the Nephilim is a crucial part of the biblical narrative that teaches us about divine justice, the need for purity, and the hope of redemption through obedience to God. After the flood destroyed all life on earth except those in the ark, God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants. This covenant marked a new beginning for humanity and creation. God promised never again to destroy the earth with a flood and established a sign of this eternal promise. Noah's sacrifice. When Noah and his family left the ark, Noah built an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings of every clean animal and every clean bird. This act of worship was an expression of gratitude and recognition for divine salvation. Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and every clean bird. He offered burnt offerings on the altar, and the Lord smelled the pleasant aroma and said to himself, "I will never again curse the ground because of man, because the inclination of man's heart has been evil from his childhood. I will never again destroy every living thing as I did this time." Genesis 8:20-21, God's promise. God blessed Noah and his sons, telling them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. He also established a new relationship between humans and animals, where animals would now fear humans. Furthermore, God gave permission for human beings to eat meat on the condition that they did not consume blood, for blood is life. And God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Your fear and fear will fall on all the beasts of the earth, and on all the birds of the sky, and on everything that moves on the earth, and over all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that moves and lives will be food for you, things, but do not eat meat with the life in it, that is, with the blood in it." Genesis 9:1-4. The covenant and the sign of the rainbow. God then established the covenant with Noah and his descendants, promising that he would never again send a flood to destroy all life on earth. As a sign of this eternal covenant, God placed the rainbow in the clouds. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, "I will establish my covenant with you and with your future descendants, and with every living thing that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and the wild animals, all those who came out of the ark with you, every living thing on the earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by a flood. There will never again be a flood to devastate the earth." And God continued, "This is the sign of the covenant that I am making between me and you, and all living beings that are with you, for all future generations. My bow that I placed in the clouds will be the sign of my covenant with the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in them, then I will remember my covenant with you and with living beings of all species. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. The rainbow is in the clouds. I will look at it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living thing of every kind that lives on the earth." Genesis 9:8-16. Human responsibilities. God also instituted a new moral and judicial code for humanity. Human life, being created in the image of God, should be rigorously protected. God declared that anyone who shed human blood would have their blood shed for human beings, thus establishing retributive justice as a fundamental principle. Whoever sheds human blood, his blood will be shed by man, for in the image of God was man created. Genesis 9:6. The new humanity. From Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the earth would be repopulated. This new humanity was called to live in accordance with God's commandments, preserving life and exercising responsible dominion over creation. Noah's descendants began to spread across the earth and form nations, fulfilling the divine mandate to multiply and fill the earth. However, humanity would continue to struggle with sin and rebellion against God, as would be seen in subsequent generations. Reflections on the alliance. The covenant with Noah is a significant milestone in the biblical narrative. It reaffirms the grace and mercy of God, who, despite the judgment of the flood, continues to commit himself to humanity. The rainbow serves as a constant reminder of God's promise to preserve life and not again destroy the earth through a flood. This covenant also sets a pattern for the future covenants that God would make with his people, culminating in the new covenant in Jesus Christ. Thus, the covenant with Noah is a crucial link in God's redemptive story, pointing to God's faithfulness and his ongoing plan of redemption for humanity. Conclusion. The chapter on the covenant with Noah reveals to us the depth of God's grace and mercy, even in the face of human rebellion. He reminds us of the sanctity of life and the need to live in accordance with divine commandments. The rainbow promise assures us of God's eternal commitment to creation and invites us to trust in his faithfulness. When it came time to prepare the ark for the impending flood, God gave Noah specific instructions on how to gather the animals that would be saved. This chapter describes the divine organization and faithful obedience of Noah in carrying out this monumental task. Divine instructions to Noah. God commanded Noah to build an ark to save himself, his family, and a representation of every species of animal from imminent destruction. Detailed instructions included the type and number of animals to be taken. Of every living thing, of every creature, you will take a pair of each into the ark to keep them alive with you, male and female. Of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves close to the ground, they will come to you to be kept alive. And you will take every kind of food that is eaten and store it up for food for yourself and for them. Genesis 6:19-21. Noah's obedience. Noah followed all of God's instructions precisely. He and his sons built the ark according to divine specifications and began to gather the food necessary for survival during the time they would spend in the ark. Noah did everything exactly as God commanded him. Genesis 6:22. The gathering of the animals. In compliance with God's instructions, the animals began to arrive at the ark. God arranged for the animals to come to Noah 2 by 2 of each species, male and female. This event was a miracle of divine organization, showing God's absolute control over creation. The animals according to their kinds, all cattle, every creature that moves along the ground, and every bird according to its kind, came to Noah and entered the ark. Genesis 7:14-15. The inclusion of pure and unclean animals. In addition to the pair of each species, God instructed Noah to take 7 pairs of each species of pure animal and 7 pairs of each species of bird, so that they could be used for sacrifices and to ensure the continuity of the species after the flood. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and his female, and a pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and his female, and also 7 pairs of each kind of bird, male and female, to preserve their species throughout the earth. Genesis 7:2-3. Divine logistics. The logistics involved in gathering and caring for all these animals on the ark were extraordinary. Noah and his family needed to organize spaces for each species and store a sufficient amount of food for everyone. Divine supervision ensured that everything was done according to plan. They entered the ark with Noah, 2 by 2 of all creatures that had the breath of life. Those who entered were male and female of every living creature, as God commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door. Genesis 7:15-16. The purpose of preservation. The preservation of each species of animal had a greater purpose in God's plan. In addition to ensuring the survival of creation, animals represented the continuity of life and the hope of a new beginning after the flood. So God said to Noah, "I will put an end to all human beings. Because the earth has become filled with violence because of them, I will destroy them together with the earth, make an ark of cypress wood, divide it compartments, and coat it with tar inside and out." Genesis 6:13-14. Conclusion. The chapter on the gathering of the animals in the ark is a testimony to God's sovereignty over creation and Noah's obedience to divine orders. The organization and care shown in preparing the ark reflect God's love and providence in the midst of judgment. This event paved the way for the preservation of life and the renewal of the earth after the flood, showing God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. When the doors of the ark closed, a new phase began for Noah, his family, and all the living beings that were with them. Life inside the ark during the flood is a testimony to resilience, faith, and divine providence amidst chaos and destruction. Entry into the ark. After years of hard work building the ark, Noah and his family, along with the animals, finally entered the ark. God called them in, and once everyone was safely inside, the Lord closed the door of the ark, sealing them safely away. They entered the ark with Noah, 2 by 2 of all creatures that had the breath of life. Those who entered were male and female of every living creature, as God commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door. Genesis 7:15-16, the beginning of the flood. When the flood began, rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. Groundwater also gushed out, covering the entire land and submerging even the highest mountains. The ark floated on the surface of the waters, protecting everyone inside. And the flood came upon the earth for 40 days. The waters increased and lifted the ark above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the waters. Genesis 7:17-18. Sustainment and maintenance life inside the ark required an organized routine to ensure everyone's survival. Noah and his family were responsible for feeding and caring for all the animals, as well as providing for their own needs. You will take every kind of food that is eaten and store it. It will be food for you and for them. Genesis 6:21. Divine providence. God provided for the ark to be a safe and stable place during the storm. Despite the chaos outside, the ark remained protected and intact, a symbol of divine protection over those inside it. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and cattle that were with him in the ark, and sent a wind upon the earth, and the waters subsided. Genesis 8:1. The long wait. After the 40 days of rain, the waters continued to cover the land for another 150 days. During this time, Noah and his family remained patient and confident in God's promise. They waited for the sign that the land was beginning to dry. After 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark and released a raven, which flew back and forth until the waters had dried up from the earth. Then Noah sent out a dove to see if the waters had receded from the surface of the earth. Genesis 8:6-8. The sign of hope. Noah sent out a dove several times to check if the waters had receded. Finally, the dove returned with an olive leaf in its beak, a clear sign that the waters were receding and life was resurfacing. When evening came, when the dove returned to him, it had in its beak a young olive leaf. Then Noah understood that the waters had receded from the earth. Genesis 8:11. Exit of the ark. After some more time, the land finally dried up completely. God ordered Noah to leave the ark with his family and all the animals so that they could repopulate the earth and restart life. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons and their wives. Also bring out all the animals of every kind that are with you, the birds, the large animals and the small animals that they move close to the ground, so that they may spread over the earth and be fertile and multiply in the earth." Genesis 8:15-17. Conclusion. The period inside the ark was a time of testing and trust in divine providence. Noah, his family, and all the animals were sustained by God's grace in the midst of the judgment of the flood. The ark was not only a means of physical salvation, but also a symbol of God's faithfulness to his promises and the importance of obedience and faith in times of difficulty. Life inside the ark was a testimony to divine care and protection, and a preparation for the new beginning that awaited after the waters of the flood receded.